Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. The residents of the Falkland Islands, or Malvinas, have spoken. They wish to maintain their status as a British overseas territory. Argentina has dismissed the referendum as folly. It would appear the twin pillars of the international order are on a collision course. Does self-determination trump the sanctity of sovereignty? To crosstalk this island dispute, I'm joined by Luke Coffey in Washington. He is a Margaret Thatcher Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Also in Washington, we have Willard Alejandro Sanchez. He is a Research Fellow at the Council on Hemispheric Affairs. And in London, we cross to Richard Gaut. He is a former Latin American correspondent and editor for The Guardian. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Richard, if I can go to you first. The recent referendum overwhelmingly passed, so we should recognize self-determination of those people living on those islands. Yes or no?
Definitely not. No, self-determination doesn't apply to a small group of people living on an island miles away from the mainland of Britain.
Okay, that was very clear. Luke, jump in.
Well, I tell you, it certainly does. It doesn't matter if it's one single person. They have the right of self-determination. It's clearly outlined in the UN Charter. This is a very fundamental right, and they have exercised this right, and the world should listen.
Okay, you guys are being real quick here. Alex?
I'll try to keep it short. For the past few years, the Argentine government has accused the UK of carrying out a policy of 21st century colonialism in the islands. I think the referendum was an interesting and important tool by the UK to show that the will of the islanders is being respected, and these are people that have lived in most cases for their entire lives in these islands.
Okay, Richard.
But Peter, I would say that it's not.
Let's go to Richard first. This is going to be very lively. Richard first, please. Go ahead.
And the problem is, it's not a question of what the islanders think. It's a question of the sovereignty of the islands and the sea around them, and that at present belongs to Britain, and it is claimed by Argentina. So the views and thoughts of the islanders are completely and absolutely irrelevant.
All righty, Luke, go ahead. Irrelevant.
That is not true. The wishes and the will of the islanders is very important here. This is what it's all about. It's about what do the people of the Falkland Islands want to live under. Do they want to live under the crown of the United Kingdom, or do they want to be part of Argentina? They've overwhelmingly decided that they want to be part of the United Kingdom. And this wasn't a tool by the United Kingdom, actually. This was the whole referendum idea came from the Falkland Islands government. It was the Falkland Islanders themselves that have the right of self-determination enshrined into their constitution. It's the Falkland Islanders themselves that have decided to exercise this right of self-determination. Now, David Cameron in London said that he would back the Falkland Islanders no matter what the outcome of the vote. And he has done so. And Argentina needs to listen. The people of the Falkland Islands want to remain British. Very clear.
Alex, is it an either-or situation here, as it was just described?
Pretty much. Unfortunately, we have to look at this from a historical perspective. I think both the government of Argentina and London have been fighting for control of the islands since the 19th century. Since 1833 is the date when the UK is accused of having expelled the Argentines that used to live in the islands, and they brought in their own people. And obviously, depending on who you ask, an Argentine or a British historian, they're going to tell you a different version of probably the same history. So obviously, both nations are not going to agree on some kind of sovereignty. Sovereignty is not on the table. The UK has obviously said that. And I actually disagree with what Luke said. I think this is a tool, especially because Argentina has been trying to get a sympathy vote from Latin America, from the developing world, by saying, oh, the UK are the evil country. They're trying to steal our lands. They're carrying out, like I said, this 21st century colonialism. And the UK is trying to, with this referendum, can go around and say, no, we're not imposing our will on anybody. The people that live in the islands are happy with the current relationship with the UK, and we're respecting that, and we'll protect that.
Luke, you wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, well,
let's go to Luke first. Let me go to Luke first. Let's go to Luke first. Go ahead, Luke.
I find it shocking that, that there's a whole group of people around the world who simply want to ignore the wishes of the Falkland Islanders. I mean, this is an extension of a campaign by Argentina to dehumanize the Falkland Islanders. Quite regularly, we hear Argentine officials describe the Falkland Islanders as a population and not a people. The Argentine foreign minister a couple of weeks ago in London even went so far as to say that the Falkland Islanders did not exist. These are outrageous comments. These are the words of colonizers. And it's absurd to think that a country that's supposed to be a member of the G20, part of the democratic community in the world, would make these sort of claims.
Okay, Richard, jump in.
The Falkland Islanders, the people who live on the Falkland Islanders, do not constitute a people. They are British subjects who happen to live on the Falkland Islands. And it's worth saying that more than 30 years ago, the British government...
There are 3,000 people that live on these islands that would disagree with you.
Richard, go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah. Never mind. Never mind. More than 30 years ago, the British government, including Mrs. Thatcher, were very keen on negotiating the future of those islands with Argentina. And they came very close to an agreement, which was spoilt by the Argentine military invading the islands. But the situation has not changed in those 30 years. The British ought still to be keen to negotiate sovereignty, because traditionally, over the 130 years in which the British have occupied the islands, the legal department of the Foreign Office has always had doubts as to the validity of the British claim. And so it's perfectly legitimate for the Argentines to suggest that there should be a dialogue about the future.
Okay, Alex, you look like you wanted to say something. Go right ahead. No, let's go to Alex. Alex first. Go ahead.
Yes. Just very quickly. Like I said, I've read the accounts by Argentine historians. They have their own version of what happened in these islands and why they have their claim to it. They say that they got the islands from the Spanish crown, I believe, after they got their independence, and then the UK came. So I think we can obviously here sit down and discuss 19th century historical facts for the next 2 hours and probably not come to an agreement. But I think what's important is that this referendum has humanized the Falklands dispute. It's not just about the land, it's not just about the oil, which and
we'll
the gas
talk about that in a second. We'll talk about that in a second.
Critical factor. Good. But it has humanized it because it has given a face to the dispute, saying it's not. Yeah.
Okay, Luke, go ahead, jump in.
Peter, I think it is worth actually exploring a bit of the history here. You know, what we now call Argentina today broke away from the Spanish Empire, declared independence in 1816. The last Spanish settlement on the Falkland Islands was 1811. So at the time of Argentine independence, Spain did not have de facto or sovereign control over the Falkland Islands. So the idea that Argentina would inherit something that Spain didn't even have to give is ridiculous. In 1833, when the British warship HMS Clio arrived to the Falkland Islands to reassert British sovereignty there, that was first declared in 1765, they expelled only the Argentine military garrison, 26 soldiers, 10 of whom were implicated in a recent murder at the time, were kicked off the islands. The Argentine civilians that were living there were free to stay, and many did so, in fact. So fast forward today, the history is interesting, but actually it's not that important. What is important is the will of the Falkland Islanders themselves. They have said they want to be British, and we should respect that.
Yeah, but they can be British, but why do they have to have... Okay, Alex, go ahead, jump in. Go ahead.
I'm just gonna say that I take exception with one word that Luke said when he said that the Argentine soldiers that were at the islands at the time were free to stay or leave the islands as they wish when the British came. I think that sounds really weird when it comes to like British imperialist history and how we see the world. I've never heard of these colonial empires from Spain, the UK, France, Holland giving much of an option to people that live in a land. They usually just make a decision for themselves and say, "Oh, we allow you to stay, or we want you to leave."
Okay, Luke, this is crosstalk. Go ahead.
It was a fact that Argentine civilians were not only asked to and allowed to, but many did stay after 1833. And there was never an indigenous population on the Falkland Islands that were expelled by anyone. No. The first inhabitants of the Falkland Islands were European. So this idea that someone was kicked out and another power implanted people is absurd, and it's just not true. And this is the same line we hear over and over again from Buenos Aires, and it's simply false.
Richard, go ahead before we go to the break. Let me go to Richard.
Well, I'm afraid it's just not true. The British seized the islands in 1833 and subsequently settled it with settlers from Britain, from the Falkland Islands, from St. Helena. It was a British colonial project. In the,
okay, so Richard, they're colonizers.
That's not true. Not true.
For Richard, they're colonizers, right?
Absolutely right.
Luke?
Not true.
Alex?
It's simply wrong. It's historically inaccurate, and it cannot be backed up with any historical documents or data to prove.
Alex, go ahead before we go to the break.
The problem is that these islands never had an indigenous population to begin with. So obviously the question is, who got there first, who inhabited the islands for the longest time, and who has like a legal claim to them. Obviously, like I said, depends who you ask. You're going to get different accounts from the Spanish, the Argentines, the British, from the islands, the islanders themselves. I will simply call them islanders. I will not call them colonials or any indigenous. I will simply say they live there now, and they have done it for all their lives probably.
All right, Luke, before we go to the break, real quick, 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, I'll say that although the history of the Falkland Islands is important and there's a clear historical case for British sovereignty over the islands, it's actually secondary to the fact that the people of the Falkland Islands want to be British. And that's actually what we should be focusing on, is the fact that 99.8% of those that voted wanted to remain a British overseas territory.
All right, gentlemen, I have to jump in. We have to go to a short break, and after that short break,